Thank you, Clinton.
All right, we're on again as we are every Wednesday evening from beautiful Belize City. I am G. Michael Reed. We're joined as usual by our co-host, Mr. Joe Cowie. Some people call him Jose. I like to call him simply Joseph, and he responds to every call. Gregory Morrison will be joining us later, and tonight we're privileged and honored to have with us on an encore visit Mrs. Deidre Gillett. Am I correct? I correct. I remember the name. Yeah,
Yeah.
Deidre is a historian. She's been doing a lot of research, and we felt like before the month of September was out, we get you back to talk more about the historical aspects of our beginnings and whatnot, and what you yourself are doing. Are you by career a historian, or is it something that you do on the side?
It's on the side, but I spend hours every single day for the last 18 years on
Wow.
research.
Okay.
And I'm not funded by a university, I'm not sponsored by anyone. This is all me. Um, so this involves not just reading material, but traveling to different places to get information. It has been very in depth.
Is it still fun to you?
I love it. I'm never going to stop.
Wonderful. Well, we hope you're doing because the stuff that you're coming up with, I think, deserves to be shared. People need to know. You've heard the narrative in Belize, and there are two of them. One is that our history came from the Battle of St. George's Key, and we came up, self-independence, independence, and the next narrative, of course, is that well, that one myth. None of that ever happened. We can't believe that happened. From your research, which side would you say you're traveling on now, and are you convinced? Are you comfortable in that position that yes, this is what transpired after having done all that research?
I'm comfortable in saying it did transpire because I'm not looking at British records. I'm looking at Spanish records. I
Mm.
reviewed records from Jamaica, and my research is more in depth in that I profile people. So I go to see what names were listed in records,
Mm-hmm.
and I essentially profile these people. Who were they? How did they get into the position that they had? Where did these families come from? What were their occupations? So it's more in depth for me, and that's why I can confidently say that it did happen because there's too much information out there to confirm it.
Wonderful. So you did a lot of research. You started out doing family history, I take it, and then you decided to just branch out and go all the way and 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 do a country kind of thing, right? From where is Deidre from originally? What
So
area, I believe?
my mom's family is from Orange Walk, and my
Okay.
dad is from Belize City, but his father was born in Gallon Jug. So I have, on the Gillette side, it's Crooked Tree, obviously, but
Okay.
before they were only there for my granddad, his father, and actually my granddad and his father were in Crooked Tree for 2 generations, and prior to that, it was from Boom.
Do you speak Spanish?
A little bit. I'm not a daily practicer, but I
Yeah,
understand.
yeah. Good, good, good.
Yeah.
So, the Gallant Jug and the Crooked Tree, did you ever find out where the name came from? Because it's been a mystery to many people. Where did Crooked Tree come from?
So the I have not found anything going back to before the evacuation of the Mosquito Shore,
Uh,
but after that there is records referencing a tree in the area, which was essentially a landmark as to where the settlement was. And before it was called Crooked Tree, it was also actually called Tilliton. Um,
huh.
yeah, named after the Tillett
The
family.
Tillis, yeah, who were
Yeah,
prominent there, yeah.
yeah. So one thing, I had a grand aunt who was a school teacher. She was a school teacher in Gallon Jug, Orange Walk, and Belize City, and she was very she was like an encyclopedia with the way her mind worked, very factual with the way she spoke, and she didn't beat around the bush. So whenever people would say stuff like the Crooked Three, or that their ancestor was Irish or Scottish, she was quick to check them and say that that's not true. So she was someone who mentored me and would sit down with me and share with me what she knew from her ancestors. And I had the privilege of spending many summers with her for hours and hours and hours. And this aunt would talk nonstop. So when I got a certain age, I started writing stuff down. And I've always been a reader. I love the encyclopedias, going to the library, which is what research is. So I started to verify some of the stuff she was sharing with me, and sure enough, she was accurate in everything she shared with me. She was accurate down to names and dates.
So a lot of your information also has come from oral history too, where from your grandmother, and I imagine her getting it from her parents, etc.
Yes.
So you've kind of put them together and come up with a package. Have you written a book?
I have written a book. I'm going to go back to this aunt and say one more thing that she would do. Whether we were in Belize together or in the States, she would pull out a phone book and look for people, look for family members and look for the elders. And we made it a point to go visit these elders. I remember driving out of state to go find someone. And we would sit down and talk with them and reminisce about old times. And I just started taking notes from these elders who shared our history. So yes, I do have a book written. Unfortunately, there are some delays with the publisher, but hopefully by the end of the year, the public will get to see this book.
Joe, jump in when you're ready. Tell me, Deidre, because we've seen that, and I spoke of those two narratives that exist, and one seems to be there's some politics involved in it. You find that many NIPs and UDPs believe in the story more than those who are the PUPs. Have you seen politics making an impact on how we view this history?
I witnessed something happening firsthand, which I don't want to discuss on camera, but I was shocked. I didn't realize how bad it was within Belize, how divided that narrative is. I do have information as far as why it happened, because of course I study and read history in different periodicals, and we all have access to different intelligent notes that the British took within the settlement of Belize and British Honduras. Those are available through the British Archives. There's a lot of stuff in there that's eye-opening. Okay, so because I've researched from the family perspective, so essentially looking at my birth certificate, my parents' birth certificate, my grandparents' birth certificate, looking at these vital records to me are fact. And I was able to trace back almost, well, in some points, 300 years to verifying that these people existed who were my ancestors. I also did a DNA test a few years ago, which confirmed, my heritage and these different parts of the world that my ancestors were from. So the argument that some people have that, oh, this is the white man writing something or the British writing something, the research is a little bit deeper than that. Yes, there are various perceptions or perspectives, but there are many court records that we can also access, and letters which are not shedding a good light on certain people as we may think. It actually is very incriminating towards a certain group of people. And sorry.
You said something interesting. You think it was deliberate? There was a deliberate move to influence how we saw our history and what we believed as we evolved into a nation. Was it deliberate?
Yes, and I think it actually goes back to slavery days, because a lot of enslavers were in fear of a revolt. So I don't think that mentality ever went away, especially when it comes to our African ancestors' records or anything to liberate or make that group of people
Feel better about
find.
themselves. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah, yeah.
it's I don't know. To me, it's heartbreaking. Why wouldn't you want a group of people to feel empowered?
It's funny because you spoke of the Belizeans abroad, that they're sought after to work because we're good. But I
Mhm.
don't know if we believe that we're good for the simple reason that we have not had heroes. We have not had stories of
Mhm.
triumphs. We have, for the most part, been beaten down indeed our
Mhm.
consciousness so that our esteem is not as high as it ought to be. And many times when you find people, you basically have to move away and go into a different environment, a different setting, and mingle with people who don't mind allowing you to grow and lift yourself. Is that some of what you found along the way?
That is personal experience with my family, and yes, with Belizeans. Um, what I've encountered as someone who lives in the States, um, it's somewhat of a self-loathing thing where people don't believe in themselves or their people. And just look at how many students have been awarded scholarships within Belize. They go to study abroad, but they don't return. Why is that? We are more than qualified to run that country. Matter of fact, people don't. I had a cousin who was the right hand person to the president of the United States. We are highly sought after in the United States because we're very intelligent and we were bred with a strong work ethic, and we also there's a courtesy about us where we're very mannerly people as well. And that's something that a lot of cultures don't teach, but it's ingrained in us as Belizeans. So part of what I want to do with this research is to let people see how rich our history is, which they have to see within themselves, but to value the people. And that is not exclusive to any group of people. It's for all Belizeans.
Wonderful.
Um,
So,
Let's say, 1 minute, Joe. Let's say good evening to Gregory. Gregory Merson, you on? Are you there?
Good evening. Good
Hi,
evening.
Good
Greg. All right.
evening.
And Deidre is
Well,
joining us again, as you can see. Joe,
I
go ahead. Go ahead, Joe, please.
yeah, how much do you believe our past can benefit our future? And if it
I've
does, how
mhm.
far back must we go to enhance the benefit of that past?
I believe our past is a foundation. And if you want to know why things are the way they are now, you have to go back to the past and understand how things got the way they are to somewhat fix it. That's my belief. I also think it's empowering to know where we came from. Um, what is my story? And a prime example, which I write about in my book, is being a Belizean American living in the States. People try to categorize you out here, but you don't quite fit in because you don't behave a certain way, you talk a certain way. Culturally, I grew up very Belizean, eating certain foods and Creole and the music, but no one could relate to that out here. I relate to my Belizean people because that was my upbringing. So essentially, for me, it has to do with identity, and having identity is what builds our self-esteem as people.
So you would say that your past can help to build a bond between a society, let's say a Belizean society we're referring to. You think
Yes,
our
sir.
past can help to build a bond between us, and you
Yes,
think
sir.
the divisiveness, especially in terms of our partisan politics, etc.
Yes,
Can
sir.
you give me some examples, if you could think of that, how we can use the past to maybe better Belize as it is now?
I think starting with our family trees. Most Belizeans are related. We're blood. um, another example would be with people denying the past. What I've personally seen is when people see how their family or relatives played a part in the past, they're more connected to it. And it enforces essentially pride in heritage and pride in the country because they can connect to it by knowing their ancestors played a role in Belize being Belize today.
Of course, we came from the whole colonial background, and slavery was also a part of that. How do we reconcile that? How do we use that to boost confidence when, in fact, we actually came from where they held us down for so many years?
Yeah, I think there's a lesson to be learned with slavery. And something that has never been done is a study on how slavery has affected people today. Obviously, financially, with opportunities, education, land being withheld for the generational wealth. But slavery is something that needs to be studied individually for people to understand how it worked. It wasn't just, and I'm no way justifying or praising Britain for what they did, but many of the slaves, specifically from Africa, it was division caused with the different tribes, divide and conquer.
Mhm.
And essentially, Africans sold their own people to these Europeans who had contracts on their head. They had to meet a quota to send slaves over to the New World. With our history, what's very interesting is you'll also see people of color or the prior enslaved owning slaves. And the reason being is there was no social service. There was essentially no, like, you had to be self-sufficient and provide work for yourself to support yourself and your family. And more than owning slaves, they were considered property, but a lot of people would lease their slaves out to other works. And that's how they made money as well. Horrible thing in history that we're still affected by today.
There's been a train of thought. Well, there's an argument that has been made as to whether slavery in Belize was different from slavery in the U.S. And we've heard people say, well, they're like sin, that's sin, slavery, that's slavery, you were in slavery. But there are some who believe that it was not as aggressive and intense as that. Well, we weren't hanging from trees for the most part. And if we were, we did. It wasn't certainly as systematic as it was over there. But do you believe that our slavery was maybe a bit more tolerable, if I can go there with that?
Any person wanting to dominate other to the point of ownership, and there were actual laws in place as to what punishment can be afflicted on another person if they try to flee or disobeyed, that's not humane.
Yeah.
But if the question is as far as what the working conditions was, yes, it was different. Belize was not a plantation-based slavery system where, I mean, there was no fields to pick cotton or sugar plantations or tobacco. It was isolated areas in either logwood or mahogany camps. And with that being said, though, it was still a very strict arrangement.
Unfair indeed, yeah.
Yes, there's many documents of uprisings of people fleeing to Mexico or Guatemala. And I've heard Belizeans say, well, we would have been treated better than the Spanish. They haven't seen those Spanish records. Some of the slaves had fled to Guatemala, and the governor complained, calling these slaves a nuisance because they were in the area, and they weren't treated any better. They were, some of them were re-enslaved when they moved to these Latin America places, but some of them were able to find a home with the indigenous people. Many of them were, and we have many relatives in Mexico and Guatemala because of that.
This brings us to a point that Joe is always making when he asks, would you rather have been colonized by the Spanish or by the English? Because I think what you're saying is that some people, while they think it might have been better, would not necessarily have been better because the Spanish were ruthless themselves. Looking at the situation in Haiti now, though, I think we can say that the French were also ruthless, and in fact, they might have been the granddaddy of them all. when it comes to how they treated other people, no?
Yeah. So going back to now, slavery has existed, as far as I know, since the beginning of time. You had people, even within the Belize settlement. I just read an article yesterday where a man who owned a works within Belize, he shortchanged one of the merchants with lumber. So they enslaved him. This was an Englishman that they enslaved in the settlement to pay off his debt. And that happened very often in the Belize settlement. It wasn't just Africans. There were Indian slaves, and some of them, it could have been for financial reasons. They couldn't support themselves. They could have been orphaned or widowed, or they had a debt to pay off. So it's much more complex. But what people don't realize with the transatlantic slave trade specifically, why did it start? It was Spain, essentially, with Christopher Columbus discovering, I don't like saying he discovered anything, but essentially getting lost at sea thinking he was in India, died thinking he made it to India. He tried to force indigenous, or not him, but the conquistadors forced indigenous people into hard labor. But many of them died from disease, from being mistreated, from being murdered because they refused to submit or be converted to Catholicism. I don't know if people realize that the Catholic Church had a role in that, in creating different contracts, such as the Asiento, which Spain owned, and they would contract it out to different countries, which is how Portugal got involved. You know, they were in the area of Angola, and the contract would say how many slaves had to come over to Spanish territory in the Caribbean. And the reason why Africans were targeted is because they were losing indigenous labor. And they also made a comment in a lot of these documents that the African laborers were much stronger and built for the hard labor that they needed them for, and in the Caribbean and Central America. So that's essentially why that mass kidnapping and migration happened with a lot of African of people, and it was orchestrated on the shores of Africa, very planned out, you know, with turning people against each other to fuel the supply and demand. So Britain, keep in mind, Spain was dominant in the Caribbean and the Americas. Britain started off with pirates. It was pirates robbing Spanish ships. And they soon found out that a lot of these slaves were of value, and stealing slaves would also essentially disrupt the Spanish economy or their work operation if they stole the laborers. So there's a well-documented pirate turned privateer, because he got hired by the British government. His name is Daniel Eathworth. And a lot of his records are not in archives. It's with the Winthrop Society, because he was hired by the same person who sponsored the Puritans coming to the US, but also to Providence Island, which is off the coast of modern-day Nicaragua. And so Daniel Eathworth is one of the earliest mention of buccaneers that I've read about being on the Bay of Honduras. He spoke of old buccaneers in that area, and he also mentioned having a map that he gave to the Winthrop Society. That's when Britain essentially got involved with the slave trade. That same Daniel Eathworth, he robbed Spanish ships going to Veracruz, and he would take those slaves up to the Carolinas and sell them. And essentially, he would sell them to these buccaneers or sailors who were going into the Bay of Honduras to do the labor to cut logwood when they discovered it was very valuable. And that's essentially how Britain got involved with the slave trade, transatlantic slave trade.
Interesting.
So there's more to it. Britain is no saint. Where's our apology? You know, it's kind of a slap in the face.
They may well be the worst of the worst.
Yeah, when you go to these countries and you see their wealth and these huge castles and for me, I look at records. I want to know who made money, you know, and it when I see even with the chicle industry, how meagerly our ancestors were paid for their work, and they had to work in these camps for a month at a time, and this really gets me upset. Slavery ended, then it transferred to the apprenticeship program, and then our ancestors were then paid. But when they were paid, they now had to purchase their food rations. When they were slaves, and when they were part of the apprenticeship program, they were given the food rations. So they're
It's
free.
getting worse instead of
And
better.
Yes, there was a
they're
riot in 1894 because of this, and the riot happened because they were getting meagerly paid, and the British government wanted to cut their pay in half. Mind you, they're working in these labor camps, the same conditions as slavery, very dangerous, for months on end, long hours away from their families, and the money that they're getting, they have to give to the commissary for their food rations. It's crazy.
It's quite an exchange.
Yes.
I would
Go
oh
ahead.
sorry.
Go ahead, Joe. Go ahead. I'll wait.
Sorry.
I would like to invite a person like Lady Dietra to come and take a look at Belizean history for the last, let's say, 75 to 100 years.
Mhm.
But to be specific, I will begin at 1950. To share quickly with you,
Mhm.
I was born in 1942, and that will give you an idea how young I am.
Mhm.
But there was a piece of history that I tried to get at the time. Vernon Leslie, who was from the UWI at the extramural department in Belize, he was a historian.
Mhm.
And we tried to get a group together to do some writing on Belizean history just for that period. And the reason why, and I will try to be brief with it, that's why I would like you to come and maybe take a look at it. What we were seeing, and I will have to base upon ethnic backgrounds, that in that period when we started the movement in 1950, the political party movement as such, the population was 71% Creole. The epicenter of the resistance to decolonization of the country was in Belize City.
Mhm.
And evidently, this is where the largest population of the Creole was. Now, the Creole displayed very strong nationalism and very patriotic fervor in their struggles and in their demonstration in the city. They are striking on the waterfront against BC and the British. Well, most of the business was owned by the British. Now, what we were trying to determine is that of that period, there also emerged parallel to it a group of Creole that was dubbed now Royal Creole. And they were dubbed such because their sentiment was more pro-British. But what we saw was that it was that group, particularly, not saying the mestizos
Mhm.
and the Mayans, but they were more on the periphery of the resistance in the constitutional decolonization of the country. And we saw the passion. In fact, I must say this, my mother, a primary school graduate, was at the center of the resistance with George Price. In fact, we burned the Union Jack in our yard, showing our contempt for colonialism. And what we need to try to understand now, that why is it that, yes, that particular ethnic group today is 21%, but seems not to have that kind of bond between them and that kind of patriotic and nationalistic fervor. I say this to end on this point, that I see where the past, through slavery, can motivate people to show that despite the oppression, that there was a resilience and determination and persistence. And in the end, we did overcome. So when I take that part of slavery and the benefit, the resilience and the courage of our African brothers and sisters, which we are a part of, I saw them in us in Belize. I saw the African in us in Belize, in the Creole, who were in the forefront and the vanguard of the resistance and the demand for colonial decolonization, constitutional decolonization. I would have liked somebody, and at the time there was Vernon Leslie, who showed a lot of interest in trying to do this study. We never did get it done. So I listen to you, Keely, and trust me, I do believe in the past. And without it, there will be no future. So think about it.
Okay.
Deidre, did your research take you to the Guatemala claim? Did you look at any of that, and what do you feel about that? Did you vote yes or no to the or if you had voted, the diaspora didn't vote, so maybe you didn't vote. What do you think as far as going to the ICJ? Was it the right move or was it the wrong move?
I have my evidence and research on the matter, and I don't think the claims are valid, but because I don't live in Belize, and mind you, I feel very strongly about this, but I'm just cautious with what I say, because I think it's up to the Belize people to decide if those claims were valid or not, going to the ICJ. I will present information to people and let them decide for themselves. But in a way, from not being in Belize, I think it should have went, because if someone is making a claim, they have every right to go before a judge and courts to present the matter, and that authority essentially should rule and decide the matter for whoever's making the claim. But
Well, yeah, we are going to the courts now. There's a group down south, as you know, the Belize Volunteers, who go into the Sarastuna and trying to maintain a presence there, if you will, from time to time. Do you have any comments on that? Any thoughts about that? Do you advise against it, as Michael Spat has come out? You know, a politician down there is in hot water now for coming out and suggesting that maybe they're antagonizing the people as opposed to giving peace a chance. What's your opinion on that?
Again, I'm someone who doesn't live in Belize, but I strongly feel that if something is ours, there should be a presence there. And my opinion is, why isn't the BDF there protecting the land and protecting Belizeans who want to go visit the area? That's my opinion. Part of ownership has to do with possession. And I'm just going to put that out there. I'm not going to say any more. Ownership has to do with possession. So why isn't the government taking measures to protect what is ours already and protect the people who want to visit and enjoy the area? There shouldn't even be a discussion with citizens of Belize feeling threatened for going to an area that belongs to Belize, or a flag being removed. Why did that happen? You know, that's my opinion.
I was going to say, I appreciate that. And I was going to say that just recently, I think for the very first time, we saw the foreign minister of Belize lodge a complaint at the United Nations about the Guatemala constant intrusion into our national waters. And I think it was a very good and important response that he made to the United Nations to point out to the whole world that what Guatemala is doing is pretty much destructive and obstructing the Belizean people to exercise the sovereignty over their territory with their behavior. So I that's the first time I want to say I'm grateful and happy that the foreign minister had made those type of comments in front of the world body. And it has not been done before that I'm aware of by any previous Belize government.
Yeah, it goes back to what I was saying earlier about us having pride in ourselves and our people. If someone is attacking our people for going in that area, that's kind of victim shaming, you know? Why aren't we protecting our own? If that's Belize territory, why can't people go there to enjoy the area instead of saying, oh, you're provoking or don't cause wind or waves? I don't understand that thinking, especially if it belongs to Belize.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, the fact is, though, that we're before the court to establish that once and for all. So maybe for the time that we're before the court, we might refrain from doing that just for the sake of not creating any situation and unwanted. For instance, one of those Guatemalans on that boat with those
Mhm.
they had weapons. A
Mhm.
weapon goes off maybe accidentally. Somebody trip
Mhm.
over another one. Somebody
Mhm.
gets shot. It's a serious incident that we're looking to deal with there. How are we going to handle that then? What do we do? You see?
Yeah, it goes back to what I said about with the BDF or the government, knowing that our people are going to the area. What is our government doing to protect its own?
But what can they do? We're talking
Well,
about a
Yeah.
force.
I do think that one of the issue Foreign Minister Courtney mentioned was to establish some type of a protocol that
Mhm.
would allow Guatemala to recognize our right to visit that area
Mhm.
and not to remove our symbol of our nation, which is our flag, when planted. I think, or at least not in the immediacy of our presence and so forth. You know, I think their action is provocative, and I do
Yeah.
think it is also illegal and wrong,
Mhm.
and that we do have the right under all of our constitution and
Mhm.
all the understanding of where our boundaries are. So
Does
Yeah.
I
the does the
I
UN
applaud
have
you.
does UN have the authority to do that? Does UN have the will to do it?
Well, I don't know that they'll do anything, but I think it's a proper um, um,
Procedure with the lodgement,
appropriation
yeah.
appropriate for us to lodge the complaint, and then they also are part of the OAS.
Yeah.
So I think it could probably have the OAS have more involvement in trying to measure Guatemala's behavior in this regard. You know,
Yeah.
I think the UN can make a difference, and I think it could influence. Or since we're complaining about it, I think it could influence how the OAS will deal with its observer status and trying to dispel any type of outbreak of hostilities, or not even that's putting it far, but just to keep things calm and to try and be a more even mediator, because so far I think they have not been as even a mediator. They have allowed a lot of Guatemalan actions and to happen into Belize without, probably, I don't know if they go back and respond to Guatemala and say, hey, you shouldn't be having people cutting the forest down, you shouldn't be having people fishing, you should take better measures to protect your population from intruding into Belizean territory. I don't know what measure they take in that regard, how they respond to Guatemala, because that's not a public issue. But hopefully these complaints will ensure that the OAS will take some of those measures into consideration and be more proactive in making things more even heeled.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the ICJ is a part of the United Nations. And with any court case, the more documentation you have, the stronger your case. So, again, I don't know internally who's taking note and reporting these things, but the more instances that are documented formally, I think it will uh, look good in our favor as Belizeans.
Well,
I
DJ,
think one of the
you,
good things that has come out of it is that while our Belizeans were risking their lives at the Saskatoon Island, it has pushed the government to go and make demand now on the Saskatoon Protocol. There was an
Yes.
agreement to develop a Saskatoon Protocol to deal with that problem. And for whatever reasons, the government had gone silent on it. But it seems that the persistency of the Belizeans going there, which they themselves was not too supportive of,
Right.
because the site has been unnecessarily provocative. But I think now what has come out of it is that they have finally decided now to go to the United Nations and try through the OS and so to pressure Guatemala to let us go through in the meantime with this Harsut protocol.
Yeah.
So that is the good, I think, that come from what they did.
Yes,
What
yes.
you call them,
Most
the volunteers, no?
Most
Yeah.
definitely. And I,
Deidre,
Can we read what Mr. Elson Wade just wrote?
yeah, Belizeans should not be prevented or discouraged from going anywhere in Belize. The legal opinion said it was a good thing that we continue to visit the area, although it does not weaken our case if we don't go there. I agree that possession is 99% ownership, which is the point you made, Deidre. Yeah, apparently they're suggesting that it doesn't weaken our case if we don't go, but it might not be a bad thing for us to go. My
Right.
concern is that something might happen that would just stymie the whole progress that we have going. Because at some point the case has to go to court. I believe it's going to be coming up sometime soon. Something has to be done because I believe we need to move forward as two nations living in peace side by side, as opposed to always bickering and somebody throw something over there and whenever a situation comes up, it's pulled out like a political football and kicked the run. So I really think that the situation needs to be settled. And I, for one, am happy that we are going to the ICJ. Deidre, your evidence seems to support the 10th of September. But what do you think about the 10th? Should we try to revive it? Because the way it's going, it seems like if it continues this way, it will be gone.
Yeah, I understand why a lot of people are not supporting it and frustrated with it because the history was never told correctly. And going back to my research, I profile people. Who were these people that defended the settlement of Belize? And we can start with the meeting that was held by Thomas Potts in the settlement, where they voted on who would defend the settlement of Belize. And if you read the names of who has been celebrated in history as the people who defended the Belize settlement. Now, when it did come time to fight, many of these baymen did offer their personal merchant vessels. And I don't think people realize that these merchant vessels and even smaller dories were essentially emptied out and refitted for battle. So this wasn't a fleet of ships that came from Britain or from Jamaica. Most of these vessels were privately owned by people who lived in the settlement of Belize. Who the heroes were, in my opinion, are the ones who voted to defend the settlement of Belize. And if you profile, with the exception of Thomas Paslow, he came from Ireland, and we know of his shady past.
Right.
But if you read through those names, most of them were colored people, with the exception of the two-time evacuees of the American Revolutionary War. And the evacuees were people who were on the Mosquito Shore. I've counted for probably 3-4 generations or more. They were forced to leave the Mosquito Shore to evacuate to the Belize settlement, where most of them lost everything in that evacuation. And then 2 months after they arrived in the Belize settlement, a hurricane hit, where only one house was left standing. And just for perspective, I've seen various reports which pretty much estimate between 400 to 700 people were in the Belize settlement. Most of them were slaves. Keep in mind, these old baymen, they were merchants. Most of them didn't even live there. They had homes abroad. They had homes in New England colonies, Britain, around the world. And they were always at sea in their vessels because they were merchants. So it was mostly their slaves who were in the settlement. It was some 2,207 people who evacuated the Mosquito Shore. They settled in an area called Convention Town in Belize, which more or less it's near just south of Ladyville area. Sorry. So that settlement, you know, two months later, hurricane hit, destroyed everything. People lost vessels that were at sea. They lost their livestock. They had to rebuild again. So, and then going back to those American refugees, the British loyalists who they essentially fought on the British side of the war when America gained its independence from Britain, and they were outcasted. Yarborough was one. Rayburn was one. Bennett was one. Nicholson. They had their properties confiscated, their bank accounts seized. They lost everything. They were kicked out of the country by their own families. They were transported to Jamaica first, and that process, and then they were welcomed to the Mosquito Shore to settle. They were only there for a few years when they were told that they have to evacuate. So then they came to
that's when the British signed the agreement with Spain, right?
Yes, 14 July 1786 Convention of London Treaty was signed. Which,
that was what? Concerning what? What was this treaty about? To
That
allow
treaty-
them to stay?
no, so that treaty essentially was to benefit the Baymen in Belize. These old Baymen were very wealthy people, so they essentially negotiated logging rights for the Belize settlement or for the Belize area. But in that negotiation, they were with Spanish, they agreed to evacuating these 2,207 people from the Mosquito Shore. The Mosquito Shore was always our most stable settlement because the Mosquito Shore was never conquered by the Spanish. The Spanish could not lay claim to that area because the mosquitoes, in many of their documents, they noted that they were too warlike and violent to conquer, and the terrain was difficult for the Spanish. So the British, going back to the early 1600s, they befriended the Mosquito Indians by, you know, giving them gifts and trade, and eventually setting up a trading port. They were allowed to settle there on the Mosquito Shore, and the main settlement was called the Black River Settlement, which was I'm so sorry. I'm drawing a blank.
What I wanted you to also mention is that because of that relationship, four of the kings of the Mosquito tribes were crowned in Belize.
Yes. Mosquito kings were crowned in Belize because of that relationship. Also, many of us Belizeans share the Mosquito indigenous heritage, which a lot of
who are the people that were allowed to vote when they were to vote on whether to stay or to?
That's a very good question. It was those who were landowners, and to be a
They were
landowner.
not slaves. The slaves were not allowed to vote.
No, but
Sorry, I just want to be a little bit pulling your legs here. The people who are allowed to vote were the people who would be defending their own economic interests, not the interests of the slaves.
Of course. Except by accident, the slaves were also protected and defended in that regard, right?
But the question is that the people who were allowed to vote were the people who had economic interest in the colony.
Yes.
Whatever it was.
But a lot of those people were also colored people.
Yes.
But the slaves fought. The slaves fought.
Yes.
And do you believe they fought voluntarily or under pressure?
I have a opinion about that. I've watched documentaries with like cults. there's something called mind control, you know, or people getting accustomed to a certain system or being beaten down so badly where you just go with the flow. But that theory, to an extent, and I'm going on research now. The old Baymen, most of them voted to evacuate because, yes, they had a financial interest in the Belize settlement, but many of them were there in 1779 when the Baymen were captured by the Spanish and imprisoned for a few years.
Yeah.
The people who voted to defend Belize were these evacuees who had nowhere to go. But yes, many of them were colored people. The Flowers family voted. They were prior enslaved. The Dawson family was prior enslaved as well. They voted because where were they going to go?
So you're saying that
Yeah.
that these were free slaves,
Yes.
people that were formerly slaves that were freed.
Yes.
There were
Keep in-
slaves that were freed at
and
that
some
time.
and some even after gaining their freedom themselves start owning slaves.
Yes.
Well,
And
who was it
that's
that freed them? It wasn't
They're
an
ma-
act of parliament, right?
no.
That was
With the
done by
They
their
bought their
owners.
freedom.
It
yeah.
was
So
their owners that freed them.
the Flowers family was freed on the Mosquito Shore. Their owner was William Flowers, and this is a very good story. William Flowers decided to return back to England, and he freed his slaves. They kept his last name. A few years later, an Irishman came in the area, O'Neill, and he said that William Flowers owed him money, that the slaves were in probate, and they were trying to re-enslave the Flowers family. It was a big court case.
Yes.
The Flowers family were furious. So they ended up robbing a few people in the settlement and stealing guns and provisions, and they fled into the bush. Fortunately, the superintendent at the time knew the Flowers family. He was able to find them, and he told them to return back everything that they stole, and they would not be prosecuted. And that same superintendent ended up writing a letter to England, to the courts there, stating that the Flowers family is free and that they're to be left alone. So going back to the whole slavery thing, there was always a fear of being re-enslaved if you could not provide for yourself. And unfortunately, what people did to provide for themselves was works. And the Spanish, going back to 1787, before the Battle of St. George's Key, they were selling land grants to the settlers. Many of these settlers who evacuated the Mosquito Shore, they received reparations from Britain for cooperating. And so with those reparations, they were able to purchase these land grants from the Spanish. The Spanish recorded those land grants. Real estate transactions were recorded in Merida.
And those land grants were in Belize, right?
Yeah, it was for territory in Belize. Yes.
So this was England selling this
No,
this land.
Spain.
No.
Spain. So, but that raises an interesting question then, because Spain was selling the land, and they obviously was suggesting that it belonged to them, or which
That's the
according
case.
to the history it was. But then, and that's why I've been asking the question: why have we not gone to Spain directly and ask? What's
I
the
want to mention
situation
one
with
other
this?
thing.
Did you
I wanna-
really give these people this land?
Yeah, I want to mention one other thing before you go there, and it's also that the Spanish currency was used in the country of Belize for a period of time.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes. So that treaty, the 1786 treaty, it was not to settle. It was giving the old Baymen rights to log the area. They were not allowed to plant plantations or cultivate the land for growing food. Most of the food was imported from England for the people in the settlement. Lots of canned goods and pork and salted stuff, flour. So many records will show the Spanish coming in and harassing the settlers. They would destroy, rip up anything that was planted, or if cattle would cross the river into Spanish territory, they would kill the animal. It was very cruel. So these Spanish land grants, going back to that, this had nothing to do with Britain. This had to do with the Spanish selling land.
Of course,
beyond the treaty to the settlers in Belize. And the Spanish filed those land grants in their records office.
It had nothing to do with Guatemala either, though, because Guatemala
No.
was then also a part of Spain. So
Yes.
or they were part of Spain. So I'm saying again, though, what do you think of saying maybe? And I asked Joe this, and he suggested that, well, we're going to take on a risk, because what if Spain decide to say, yes, I did give them people a piece of land? then we'd really be in a bad situation. But do you think maybe we could use diplomatic means and approach Spain and say, well, Spain, listen, you could settle this. If you telling people just left them alone, really, I never give you that piece of land. You got independence with your territory intact, but Belize was not a part of it. Is there a possibility that something like that might help?
I think that's tricky because in 1821, Spain gave Central America their independence. So essentially, they washed their hands from any territorial claims to the area. So it goes back to
when did the British,
Mhm.
when did the British declare Belize a colony?
It wasn't until what, 1862?
I believe it was 62, yeah.
Yeah.
1862.
And that's another piece of our history is Britain was reluctant to claim the Belize settlement as their own. Who ran
Or
the
maybe the Baymans didn't want the British to rule them either, because they were pretty contrary to and wanted to do things and not follow what was the king's law at the time.
Gregory,
So
that's it. That was it.
When Central America declared this UDI, the Unilateral Declaration of Independence, because they were all together
1821.
then, right? And they all declared themselves independent of Spain.
Yeah, that was
Central
1821.
American countries.
Yes.
So they were right. They were like a union first.
Yeah. So
when they declared themselves independent of Spain.
Yeah, there have been some redefining of the territories from when they independence from Spain. Matter of fact, it was what is it? So sorry.
1821?
No, the state in Mexico that was part of Guatemala. I'm looking at so sorry.
Not Chiapas.
Pieces. Yes, Chiapas. Thank you, G Mike. Yeah. Chiapas was a part of Guatemala.
Okay.
But the territory was redefined a few times. Matter of fact, the captaincy of Guatemala had included Costa Rica, Honduras, El Salvador.
They fought to get the independence in those other territories from.
But it didn't. It never included the Mosquito Shore.
and that's true. And that is one argument that I've read where it says that if Spain didn't have the Mosquito Coast and didn't own it, then how could they claim similarly Belize where they never
settled
on and settled, because they never had claim to the Mosquito Coast because they never had occupation of that territory.
Yeah. There's a few things that Britain, I feel, is hiding. And one, you'll rarely see this term, but it sparks my interest. And that is that the Baymen, most of the old Baymen were a part of a society called the Honduras Merchant Society, which whenever you read about it, it says they were a powerful group of men. And going back to the 14th of July, 1786 treaty, the Convention of London, do you know it was only one representative from Britain who went to sign that treaty? And Parliament in Britain actually vetoed it. They wanted for it to be investigated, but it got turned down. So this is something I'm still looking to. Who was this man and what was his connection to the Old Baymen, where he was able to negotiate that evacuation and essentially keep the Old Baymen within the Belize territory? But then again, it would have changed the trajectory of history. We wouldn't be Belizeans today. But it's something to look into.
That let's look at the chronological order. But we'll come backward. They declared Belize a colony in 1861, 62, thereabout.
Right.
Then the Central American countries declared themselves. They had a unilateral declaration of independence from Spain in 1821.
Yes.
So I would think that one of the significance of the Battle of St. George's Caye is that the British could have claimed that in 1798, they did won the battle. And by winning the battle and occupying the territory, then when they declared the UDI in 1821, they had no right to Belize.
Yeah. And that's, I think, is our argument.
Yeah. And that's what the argument I think are making before the ICJ. Yeah. And then the treaty The Anglo-Guatemalan Treaty.
1859,
was a very
1859 treaty.
So the
Deidre,
history is very good, and they probably need to know our history.
we're talking
Yeah.
about yeah, because that's an interesting part too. Because before I get to this, I remember going to SJC
Mhm.
and doing history, but it was a book. I can still remember a blue book with one of the Greek gods on there. So we were studying Greek history, which philosophy is not bad on that part of it. But don't you think that we have enough rich history of our own to be studying in our schools as opposed to everybody else's history?
Yes.
Yeah, that's something I'm advocating for with a very close relative of mine. Is I'm very grateful for other people coming into Belize and studying our culture, but we as Belizeans need to own these stories. The information needs to come out of our universities. We need to educate people about us.
That's
And
it.
that's why I want to
history.
see. That is why I want to see Deetra's history book on Belize.
Yeah, I
Thank
think
you.
it's gonna do us a world of good too, because it will again lift our esteem. No, Deidre,
Yeah.
tell us about.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to say this to Deidre. As the chairman was saying, when we were in school, I told our teacher, I said, why are you teaching us about the Nile? Let's say about the Belize River first. So I think we should know about our country first before we move out into the world.
Yes. Yes. What is it? You put your life vest on before you help others.
Yeah. Tell us about Barnaby Code.
Barnaby Code was the Baymen, essentially their constitution. And even after the Battle of St. George's Key, you'll see the Baymen still quoting those codes. As Gregory said, the Baymen didn't respect the British.
Right,
they
right.
were very defiant. And prior to the Battle of St. George's Key, there's someone I consider a hero. His name was Edward Despard. He was an Irishman who actually was the superintendent in Belize. And when some of these,
Let me ask you a question. Was he also the superintendent that agreed with the Flowers family? And
no, that was Laurie. Superintendent Laurie is the one who protected the Flowers family.
Okay.
And Despard, though, was also one of our allies. His wife was a Jamaican lady, a person of color. Her mother was someone who was enslaved. But he was very proud of his wife. Many documents, he's praising his wife with how brilliant she is. So when these evacuees came from the Mosquito Shore, most of the Baymen had claimed the prime real estate in Belize. But as superintendent, Despard was given the authority to delegate where people were to settle. And keep in mind, a lot of those evacuees were people of color. So he had a gentleman by the name of Jones settle next to a magistrate who was a European, and the magistrate was furious. And there was some sort of dispute with the land as far as where the magistrate was essentially trying to take over the land of where this Jones was settled. And Despard told Jones, speak up to this guy, essentially. And he did. And when he did so, he got arrested. Anyway, there's a very good court account because it talks about the Gumbe drums. When he was arrested, people were beating the drums. And also, two of his friends had paddled up the river to come to his defense and find out what was going on. But soon after that, the magistrate started to attack Edward Despard, and they even wrote that what he's doing, essentially trying to mix people, is not acceptable. Very racist commentary they wrote about. And they eventually had Despard removed from the settlement. Mind you, he was appointed by the British authority to be in Belize to be the authority there, but he was so disrespected.
I just want to also mention something about Despard that I remember reading was that he had set up so that it wasn't preferential treatment for how lands was to be issued. He created a lottery system so that you get your ticket, and if your ticket came up, then you had the choice. It wasn't based on any other condition other than winning that lottery to then get your choice of land that you were to purchase,
Whether you were black or white.
whether
Yep.
you were black or white or Creole or
Purple.
mixed race.
That
or
certainly was
whatever.
a step in the
Yeah.
right direction.
He sure
Yes.
was. He sure was.
Way back there,
He
yeah.
was later hanged in England though for
Yeah, right. And no good deed goes unpunished, right?
Yeah. Despard actually wrote a book about the Baymen in Belize, of
Yes.
how they were, how evil and crooked they were, and racist. He
Yeah.
was a man before his time. And as Gregory said, a few years later, he was tried for treason in England. So, and get this, I'm a researcher, so I requested to see the court notes for Despard's trial. Those records are sealed. Why are they sealed?
And for this time, that's what
200
how many
years.
years? 200 years.
Yep.
My God.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's
His
interesting.
wife, he had a child. I remember. I think I read.
Yes.
His wife lived to a good old age in England and lived
Yep.
among the societies, even
Yep.
though she was a colored woman.
Yep.
I
Yep.
imagine with it take enough money to get that unsealed. There must be a way to do it now, but I don't know how anxious you are to see.
I'm
Yeah.
very anxious to see it.
I'm
because-
sure you're excited, right?
Yeah.
Only
I-
Mr. Jose could afford that kind of money to get us unsealed that.
Yeah. If
I don't think his earplugs are in.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, if anyone in authority in England is listening to this, we want to see those records. We Belizean people have a right to see those records because it essentially is our history. And he
Yes.
advocated for many people, many of our ancestors in the settlement.
Do you do you think that maybe they were hiding something that we should know about? Or
I
is
don't
it
think
just
it's on Belize.
procedural?
I don't think it was on Belize. I think it's more on his activities that he was doing in England because he was charged for treason against the crown in England.
Yes.
And
Yes.
that's what he was hung for?
Yeah,
Yes.
they essentially said that he was trying to undermine the king, but where's the proof? I need to see the records.
It's sealed. It's sealed.
Yes, but that was the what do you call it? The narrative of the time. Anyone who spoke out on people of color, they were shunned. Because people were always afraid of an uprising or us knowing our true power. So it's in Belize it still happens. I'm just being being very blunt with that. A lot of our records are still sealed. So I go to other countries looking for things.
Have you met records in Belize that are sealed that you couldn't access?
I had someone helping me with the records and certain things, which again I completely respect. Certain things are not shared with the public, and even when I have seen records in Seville or England, there are certain things that they'll share with you, but for proprietary information, you cannot share the document online, but you can quote from it. Which I also understand. But as far as our African heritage and different movements, specifically riots or uprising, that seems to be a suppressed subject. And to this day, people don't want to talk about it. It's just very uncomfortable for a lot of people.
I think in Belize history, though, I think there were like 3 or 4 in the period of slavery. I have read there were like 3 or 4 major outbreak of hostilities, right? I don't know if you where slaves revolted and in some case they may have even killed their masters and fled into Guatemala and Mexico.
Yeah, there's a few more, Gregory. There's a few more where the slaves attack their masters, kill their masters, or uprising. There's a few of them.
Okay.
But again, it was not something that they wanted to share to influence others to do the same.
Right.
Joe was inviting you to come look at a period for about 70 years. What period does your research cover? How current have you come up? And how far back have you gone?
I have focused mainly on the historical stuff, going back to Mosquito Shore, how Belize became Belize, pretty much mapping not only my ancestry, I've helped a few other people to map their ancestors going back in time. I do know a little bit about the current affairs, meaning in the 1950s, 60s, 70s, 80s. But I think there's other people more qualified than I am to discuss those events, who have firsthand witnessed things.
But were you born in Belize? You were born in Belize.
I was born in the States,
Okay.
but I consider myself a Belizean.
Well, yeah, you.
I will not deny my heritage.
and you know obviously a lot more about Belize than most Belizeans who live and were born in Belize do know. You certainly more than myself, no? And I applaud that. But I really would like to see this history being taught, because we do have enough history of our own, and we do not need to go to England or France or Greece or even Africa for the most part. But of course, that's a part of our heritage. But I think that we should be looking closely at Belizean history, and it will help us a lot more than it will hurt us, for sure.
Yeah. Well, I do believe that we have a rich and exotic history, and lots of villains and lots of
the plot is complete.
Yes.
Yeah. I think it is.
We need to be careful with the political bias with history, because many people are being applauded as heroes, but everyone has had their faults. And even George Price, I have a transcription where in his early days he credited the riots. He credited other people as being the founding fathers of Belize. He said that it was those movements that essentially pivoted the nation into independence. So I think we need to look at everyone who played a part. All of the advocates, the different movements that happened, those people deserve credit as well.
Yes.
Interesting. But you're saying that George Price was giving credit to others as opposed to himself for the birth and the move to independence.
In his early days. Early days when he first got into politics, he said that was his inspiration for doing it.
Which would not be a fault, though. I mean, I think it's just it's a part of I found him to be a humble fellow. Did you do? See, my friend there might not totally agree. He's on the other side of the fence, actually. So again, and you're absolutely right. This, I believe, Greg will take a lot away from that. We have to be careful of our biases, our political biases, when we view history. It's sometimes difficult because it's so ingrained in us. We're brought up in a certain train of thought, a school of thought, and in fact, Joe and I were discussing that this morning. He was suggesting that when you talk about somebody, normally you will form an opinion based upon how close you are to the person, how much you like the person, and it wouldn't always reflect the true nature of the matter that you're discussing. But indeed, your bias will take prominence, if you will. Huh?
Yeah, we had a few founding fathers who went to jail because of their passion to protect the people. Who's willing to go to jail today to protect the people? And specifically, Antonio Sabaranes and Philip Golston. They were imprisoned because...
And Lee Richardson.
Yes, thank you. And yes. Imprisoned because of their advocacy, because of speaking up and calling people out.
Let's look at the current day politicians. Is there hope for Belize? Are you optimistic that we're going to get through this? Are we doing all right?
Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. You can go ahead.
No, be alone. Make I hear this answer on this.
When Deidre answer, then I have something to say.
Yeah.
Deidre is a historian. She's
You
not a
know,
politician.
No, she's
You
she's
go
a
ahead,
diplomat.
Deidre.
She's a diplomat also. Yeah.
I think everyone genuinely means well, but
Not everyone.
You
Not
see here,
everyone.
here we go with this bias
Well,
again. Go ahead, Deidre. Let's ignore
for
him.
it could be for themselves.
That's correct. That's correct.
But I think anyone who leads, you have to do so from a non-self-serving purpose, but really looking out for others. You're serving others, and this is just my opinion. I'm not in Belize, but what I've seen is a lack of transparency. And so, if no one is being held accountable, or budgets are not being disclosed to the public, and it's free for all. You can do whatever you want and get away with it,
And the records remain sealed.
and they remain sealed. Yeah.
Joe,
So,
go ahead, Joe. You
Well,
were getting ready to say
yes, sir.
something.
Yeah, you were mentioning one or two people who went to jail
Mhm.
in the service of their country. Well, Mr. Price had gone for a trial at the Supreme Court.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Do
for
you
sedition.
remember or understand why he was not convicted?
Because he got those people out there and say, if you hang him, we're going to burn your house down.
Well,
he had quite a following, quite a bit of supporters.
so
I think that's why the
the
British
point I
feared
want
him,
to make
actually.
is that
Yeah.
I was young and I was there myself.
Wow.
Oh,
He
oh,
was
you
tried.
were there saying
He
you
was
were there
tried.
saying find him innocent or we're going to burn your house down,
He
Joe?
was tried by a British judge and defended by a very distinguished Creole lawyer, which was
Mr.
Courtney.
Courtney.
Mhm.
Yes.
Now, the crowd was out there and the
Mhm.
shouting was there. Now, for the legal pundits who examined the trial, believe indeed that he won his case because there was not the evidence to convict him on the charge. There were others who felt that the intimidation from the crowd out there, the lies, because they were beginning to prepare to burn.
Yes. Burn, baby,
And
burn.
I believe that could have influenced him. So therefore, he too could have gone to jail, but the others never had the backing like Price to save them.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
But he was
Well-
prepared to go to jail too.
Wow.
Well, I think confetti take on a new meaning.
Yes.
Or toilet
Yeah.
paper, or toilet
I would
paper if
just,
you
before I
prefer.
exit, Mr. Chairman, I'm appealing again to, I would like Deidre to, you see, we have a lot of books written on Belize, no doubt. We have the guy Borland who did a lot of writing. We have Asad Schumann, who is more into the contemporary writing on Belize.
Mhm.
We have recently Vernon wrote on Belize.
Mhm.
And then we had some books before, even Huxley had written on Belize. Then we had Humphreys, who wrote on the
Humphreys.
diplomatic history of Belize.
I've never
So
seen
there is
that
a
one.
lot that have been written on the country, but I believe that these were written in a very disjointed way. So it would be nice to have somebody now to try to put it all together and to give us the history from somewhere maybe in the mid 1800s, and then to bring us to where we are, for the reason
Mhm.
that I could say with certainty that where we are today was not where we are in the 50s in terms of our sense of values.
Mhm.
Our sense of values, meaning in the moral sense, not necessarily equated to religion, but the simple thing of being your brothers and sisters keeper. Respect your elders, respect the law, love one another, he loved us. We had that.
Mhm.
But could that be, Mr. Cowie, because of the fact that we keep infusing new blood into our society and we keep also losing that historical fervor that our country have had for so long?
Well, I see it this way. You and I and the chairman can give our opinion, but I prefer to look to the expert who does research, like Deidre, to do the research, and then her opinion will be based on facts. Our opinions are based on emotions and feelings and whatnot. But the research needs to be done to understand why there was a change of mindset, why there was a change of values.
Joe, isn't this something universal though? I mean, don't you a
That is true
generational
That's
thing
too.
right.
That is
um,
true too.
that is not
Right. I
unique to
think that
Belize?
factor,
Yeah, that is true too.
So I think
factor, sorry.
I don't know that history is gonna assist us in that because
But it'll give us a guide step. It probably won't give us all the answers, but it'll tell us where we were and
Mhm.
why we stuck to what we were. It might not tell us why we're
But it is our,
so
but
loose
sorry, Mr. Chairman,
today.
it was our history that will give us the answer.
Yeah,
Because
I'm
the
thinking
history
of.
we are talking about
Mhm,
is sociological history, human
mhm,
behavior.
mhm.
Basically, it's about human behavior. History
But
is
part
about
of it
human
is
beings.
projection, right? It's trying to
So what
understand.
we need to try to understand is that why is it the way we are now, when in the 40s and 50s, even though we were a colony, even though we were only primary school graduate, we were living by loving our brothers and sisters. Today, we have a lot of university graduates. We have PhDs, masters. But our politicians today and our public officers and our business people generally have lost that sense of value.
Yeah.
We have come more into the materialistic world. So I am
Marshall,
saying
You know, I
it is
always
our
look at
history
I always
that will
look at
help us to understand this vicious cycle that we find ourselves in. And hopefully, from history, we will look for the answer to the virtuous cycle.
Mhm,
But it's history that we need. It is history we need to teach
mhm.
us why we come where we are.
Yeah.
Your
I
past, your future must come with your past and your
Mhm.
current. And that is what will help your future.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Deetra, I
I
must
I
congratulate
look
you in my exiting. I would like you to do some research. I think you have the passion for it. In listening to you, and you can do a great service to let us better understand why we have become to be what we are when we were not.
Thank you. Thank you for the honor.
When you say exiting, you mean stop talking or leaving the room?
Well, I will cease talking, and I will do that by thank you all for having me on and listening to me.
Thank you.
And I must congratulate her. That's why I was again repeating. I
Um,
really enjoy your show, and I would ask you now to move towards focusing on Belize.
Yes. Thank
Thank,
you.
Mr. Chairman, with your permission.
sir, granted. Peace out. Yeah, Greg, you were getting ready to say something, and
yeah.
I hope you
No,
kept that thought.
I was gonna say, I following up on what Mr. Coy was saying, I about loss of something in the fervor of our culture and our people and our value system. I look at old pictures of Belize City and I see a clean and well kept city, you know. And when you compare it to what you're looking at today, you go, what has happened? What has happened that we have just lost that civic pride in just putting our trash in a box and clean up after ourselves? It just seems so simple and so basic, you know?
Mhm.
I think though we also have to be careful not to romanticize too much because maybe the good old days weren't
No,
so
I'm
as
not
good as.
asking for the good old days because it means I'll be in chains somewhere. So I'm not asking for the good old days.
But I understand the
Wasn't
morals
so
and the
it wasn't
ethics
so
and
good for
whatnot.
me. It wasn't so good for me, right?
No,
Maybe you
no.
could pass and Deidre could pass, but they certainly are going to find me wherever I go and
You can't
pass.
even remember that. Stop your fool. You, you, eh, eh, you want to pass, you know what? The thing is, though, that I think that if the days that where we can remember, because that's how we can talk about where we,
Mhm, mhm.
what our experience is, that
Yes,
yes, we did have better values. We had
yes,
more respect for our elders. We
yes.
lived in a society where it was more a global village than today. I mean, because your neighbors could chastise you and stop you from doing the wrong thing today, or try to stop on picnic and paddy come with a machete, or you might come with a stick. No,
Huh.
so I think that there's a lot that we have gone away from fundamental values that help to make the person a better person.
Right.
I
Mr.
don't know how we're gonna fix that though. Yeah, go ahead, Dietra.
I think looking at people, desperation can change a person. If someone is hungry or living in poverty, you're not operating to the fullest of your potential, and it's trauma. It's very traumatizing to live that way. And
But Deetra, in those days, people were living much harder.
Well,
It
I
was,
was getting ready. I was getting to say too. Yeah, you don't want to be making excuses for it because
yeah,
basically our
it-
mindset. No, and go ahead, go
yeah,
ahead. You're
yeah,
right, Greg. Yeah, in those days, people were poor. I mean,
yeah.
nowadays most people are eating better. Let's be real. When 10 of us eat out of a pot, today everybody got in one pot. So a tough thing. And what has changed? Certainly is not we've not gotten poorer, but we've gotten poorer in spirit. I think we in principle, and we're not doing all we can to let the next generation come back to the old values that we have, which is kind of like it's going. The dominoes are falling the wrong way. It seems. I don't want to be overly philosophical at this point with that, but
Dietrich,
from
I
what
want
I've
you
seen,
to tell us a little bit about research and how other people could get involved in that type of endeavor and some of the techniques and stuff. I always want just for myself, really, but
yeah,
but that's something I always wanted to learn from you. So
yeah.
if you don't mind sharing some of your secrets.
Yeah, so many people will read books, but I go a little bit further. I want to know what did the record say? What was documented at this time? And for me, I started with vital records to be able to trace people and pretty much confirm their existence. Um, Many of these vital records will list occupations of people. Um, my best friend has been the archives department. Thankfully, the British archives are pretty good at sharing stuff online, or they'll email you. Some reports you have to pay for, but they'll email it to you. Same with Seville. Some things you have to go in person to review, but pretty much the archives department. But with the archives department, it's just like a library. You have to know what you're looking for. So you have to pretty much have a subject of what are you doing, who are you looking into, and it's very time consuming, but I don't want to say that to discourage anyone. um, it can be done. It takes a lot of patience, but it can be done. But have a subject.
a starting point. Yeah.
Yes, yes.
Tell me, because you've been in archives, you've been looked at things. Has there been a few things maybe that has just sparked a light, and you say, have you been surprised along the way in some of the things that you've found, and
Yeah,
how? Yeah, go ahead.
sorry, G Mike.
Now,
I'm gonna go.
yeah,
I'm gonna go back to what many Belizeans say with the River Valley families. Oh, we're Scottish. Oh, we're Irish. Gillette is Irish. Gillette is Skyrish. No, it's not. The Gillettes came from the Mosquito Shore. They were colored people. And the same with many of those last names. Just finding out where these people truly came from in their stories. Sorry, my dog is barking. Finding how closely connected we are as Belizeans to the New England colonies. It wasn't just Britain. We actually did more business with the New England colonies. Many of our ancestors came from those areas, such as Maine, Massachusetts, New Hampshire. Those things were very surprising to me. Just finding out who we truly are as people and how we connect to the world, essentially.
So we had an early invasion of American in Belize after the um, war with England. Then we had another one after the Civil War with the colonies, and then we have one now with them buying up everything in Belize they could get.
Well, going back to before the American Revolutionary War, essentially the New England colonies were a part of Britain, but I don't know why. I always thought that it was people coming from Britain. but no, if you look at different ship manifest records or where these people were born, many of them were born right in what is now the American colonies.
Right.
And you're talking about the early settlers of Belize. Somebody,
Yes,
yeah,
yes. Even
uh,
the old Baymen. Yeah.
pirates also. You think did some pirates
I-
come down that way, or you,
So I wouldn't call the old Baymen pirates, but yes, if you go back to the Mosquito Shore, it was the pirates and buccaneers who were trading with the Mosquito Indians, and thus I don't like the word Indian, but the indigenous Mosquito population. So they were allowed to trade in the area and eventually settle. But the Belize settlement, it was business. They were merchants. They were known as first buccaneers, and then they were known as Baymen. The Baymen because of the Bay of Honduras.
right?
And I was going to say, I think some of the bounties for pirates in Belize was sent out of the Americas.
Yes. Yes.
Trying
Yeah.
to capture them.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Some of our ancestors on the Bayman side played a part in intercepting ships during the American Revolutionary War. Some of them were hired to disrupt the economy in America. It's pretty deep, but they weren't pirates; they were paid to do that.
Well, yeah. But they were pirating anyway.
Yeah,
Yes.
they're pirates, but just
Yes.
yeah, with a mission.
Yes.
Not just to
They
get
were hired
gold.
hands.
Yes.
Yeah. The history is so there's so much, and we certainly couldn't cover it in a one show, really.
Yeah.
And I'm glad we have you all to ourselves this time, where you can really talk to us. No, what area do you think we should focus? Say the people of Belize, we need to know more about ourselves for us to get to be better at whatever we do. What areas should we focus? Where do you suggest we look?
I think there's a issue with self-esteem and knowing our worth as people. And for me, it has been quite empowering knowing who my ancestors were, their resilience, how they fought to exist, and how they fought to remain in Belize for Belize to exist today. That was very empowering for me. And
So
how
we have heroes.
we are heroes. Yes.
We have heroes in our past
Yes.
that we could look to. Yeah.
Yes, we can look to ourselves. Belizeans are very intelligent people. We're also multicultural. This conversation has been mostly about the Creole background, but many of us have East Indian background, Maya, Garanagu. I don't want to leave anyone out. Mestizo. We're very diverse people, but I think instead of fostering pride of one group, is being proud for the heritage of what makes Belize.
And I think
Well,
we
I
need to
think
hear
the- I
that
think
more
the young
often.
lady- I think
Okay,
the young
great.
lady from I was going to say, I think the young lady from York School Junior High said it best when she said, "My 4 baby daddy." You
No,
know,
was it
trying to-
7 baby
trying to-
daddies?
7 baby daddy. Yeah, trying to depict our multicultural society. You know, so
Yes.
we are in fact that multicultural society.
Yeah.
That spans so much, and it does show that we do have a lot more common and a lot of resiliency within us. And
Yeah.
I just would hope that the politicians would sort of embrace that rather than seem to make it a division so that they can win political supremacy.
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with being proud of a heritage, and if a heritage chooses not to celebrate as we do or observe a holiday as we do, that's okay. You
Yeah.
know, there's nothing wrong with that, having free will, so to say.
Yeah.
But let's respect each other. If specifically our Maya has asked or requested formally for their archaeological sites and the temples to be named as such, not ruins. So it's just simple things with language, things we could do to honor each other.
Yeah.
Um,
And I'll tell you, I don't have a problem with calling ruins temples, but to me, a temple is an active place.
mhm.
And if until we settle this land rights dispute, I'm going to hold off on that because I
Okay.
don't want to.
Well, I
No,
don't
listen,
know.
just hear my argument.
Well,
Until we settle that issue, I don't want to give any unforeseen power to a particular group at this point. That's how
I
I
think
feel.
it's more using the language of respect. So even if you may not acknowledge it as a temple, however, ruins has like a derogatory connotation to the word.
But
like
it's
it's
but
gone.
it's but it's
We're
what,
still
it's what
using
we've
it.
always
Yeah.
called it. It's what
Well,
we have always
we're
called it.
still making use of it. No, but we've also we've said words that cancel culture is not a reality. So that
Yeah.
I don't see. I mean, how do you know the spirits aren't still there that used to dwell in those temples? They
Yeah.
might still be very much
Oh,
alive, as far as we
well,
know.
see, I don't believe in spirits. That's the
Yeah,
difference, Michael.
yeah, and I can
Yeah.
understand that.
Yeah,
I
it's for me, it's respect. How can I respect other people? And I think that should be the conversation more people should
and
have.
and I will take that respect all the way through to us
Mhm.
reaching an amicable solution to the
Mhm.
Mayan land rights claim, and having government do an appropriation of set aside territory that they could own communally. And I always believe though that whenever we are looking at exploiting our natural resources, the local people should always be consulted. So I applaud the Mayans
Yeah.
for bringing
What-
that to the forefront of any discussion and any action. So they have challenged the government on many steps when they wanted to put loggers in there or mining or whatever, going for oil. Those are important steps and
Mhm.
necessary that we do that. But all people, all Belizeans should have that right to challenge and to advocate to their government to respect those rights.
Well, you're
Yes.
getting in a sticky issue there, and I think Deidre. I don't think Deidre is gonna be hesitant to get in there because I see you. Um, the Mayan issue, though, Greg. What are you saying? Do you support communal land rights or individual ownership of
No,
territory?
no, I don't have a problem. I don't have a problem with communal land rights, but I don't want to set it up in a way that it creates a state within a state.
Well, that's
I
it. It's
want,
bordering balkanization. We know that.
yes. So that's
And
not what I'm looking for. But I have no problem in giving them tracts of land to practice and to do customary things as they did, and to have control over how that natural resource is being used. But I also think that that resource, if oil or gold or bauxite or whatever is found there, it's not to the exclusive use of those people that are there, but it's inherently to all Belizean that would have the right to the benefit of those resources. So,
especially the
yeah,
politicians.
well,
They might get it anyway. But
yeah.
well, listen, we're a melting pot of cultures,
Mhm.
and more so now than even before. I think that is one Belize, and we have to be careful
Mhm.
with separating ourselves. I have a problem with the Mennonites getting their area and just being clannish about it and seeming to be territorial. I don't know that. I think there has to be one government for this one country. We're already small, and we
Mhm.
need, in particular, in the face of an aggressive neighbor up north, we need to stick together, come
Mhm.
together, and respect each other, and realize that one country, one people, and
Mhm.
that's the only way we're going to win.
Yeah.
But that's my point of view.
Yeah.
I think I agree with you with that. That is definitely my position, that we need to maintain the unity and build on it. We don't always have it because we may fail and think we have it, but even when it's not race, it's class. And when it's not class, it's those that are culturally think they're superior in whatever their ideas are to others. And so we do need to kind of melt this
Yeah,
down.
well, yeah, it's a tricky thing. We just have to look at all the angles and be fair.
I also think it's important within Belize for the children to visit different villages and people
Yes.
to see how
Mhm.
other people live and outside of their bubble.
Yes.
Um, I recently heard that many children have not been beyond their village because of for financial reasons, which is somewhat heartbreaking. They have not been able to enjoy the amenities that tourists come to Belize for. Never have seen the Barrier Reef or
Yeah.
landmarks within Belize because
Mhm.
they don't have the resources to do so.
Yeah.
So I think that needs to change.
Yeah.
There-
Yeah. Yeah.
And I must tell you though that there are people who have lived in New York all their lives that have not been to the Empire State Building,
Mm.
or haven't been seeing the Statue of Liberty. So I think we find it all over the place.
Mm.
I wanted to ask you though, because we began with three, and you indigenous people, the blacks and the whites.
Mhm.
Then we have an influx of others. For instance, the East Indians. Did you get to any, and again that word Indian, but just to say the real Indians, did you get anywhere in your research where they were introduced to the culture and what happened?
Yeah, I actually have ancestry from that point in our history. My grandmother's grandfather was East Indian.
Oh, okay.
So I did research there, and essentially it was linked to the Confederates coming to Belize. Um,
They
they
hired
thought,
they
yeah,
hired the East Indians, right?
yeah. So the Confederates, they lost the Civil War, and many
Right.
of them still wanted to carry on with their plantations, and there's record.
Some of them wanted to own slaves.
They did. They thought that they could come to Belize and dominate
Maintain that
dominate the
system.
people. They tried to do it with the Maya, and it didn't work. We were free people. So that's where the indentured servants came in, who were first in Jamaica, and then they came over to Belize on contract to work
The sugar farms.
the sugar farms. I'm sorry, in the Toledo area first.
So,
And
let me just ask you a quick question. So the East Indian that came to Belize, they didn't come directly from India. They came from by
No.
way of Jamaica.
the first migrations were from Jamaica, and then later on there were some people from Sri Lanka who also came to Belize.
Okay.
It's very, very interesting indeed. Well, what's next for Deidre? Where you're writing the book, of course. When can we look for the book?
Hopefully by the end of the year. I'm aiming for November.
Oh, so you're pretty finished now. Yeah.
The book is done. It's just there's legal things because much of the history has been oral history, and there's some images that were shared with me from the family. So I just want to make sure that we're protected as people. We have to protect our culture. So I'm all for people doing research and empowering themselves, but a lot of our history has been monopolized on, where images were sold to different universities from private collections underneath the family, where it's now copyrighted and you can get sued for posting a picture about your family. So I just want to make sure that I'm protecting whoever shared with me. I want to make sure that they're protected, and also my work is protected.
Yeah, that sounds ridiculous, but
It's happening.
Yeah,
It's the business part of things. You
Yep.
just have to ask
Yeah.
Maurice Sharp, right?
Yep.
Maurice Sharp said she had to
And-
use her name after they stole her
Belinda's
Yes.
Belinda's sauce. Yeah.
Yeah. What people realize too is if you don't protect yourself in copyright, someone could take your work and copyright it and turn around and sue you and send you a cease and desist. So
That's
you have to know how the business works.
And you wind up having to buy your own stuff from them.
Yes.
Yeah.
I spent 18 years, and like I said, no one has funded me, sponsored me. It's all me.
Yeah.
Of course, crediting the oral history, but the money part was all out of my pocket.
Has it been expensive?
It's not cheap,
Yeah.
and it's very tedious.
A lot of work, right?
A lot of work, and
Lots of sleepless nights, late hours.
Yeah, because when you I can get laser focused on something, and then I don't
Yeah.
want to put it down and lose
Right,
lose
right.
the sleep.
I don't see you being able to get to sleep anyway if you're latched on to something like that and you
Yes,
really want to get to the crux of the matter. I
yes,
imagine that drives you even harder. So
yes.
we want to appreciate the work that you're doing, and I look forward to seeing it in schools. That I think is the most important. But we and I imagine anybody who wants to verify it can do the work that you did and go and verify it. If not, we'll
Yes.
just have to, well, do take little snippets. If we find that this is true in this area, we can kind of figure that it's true in the other areas. But I'm certain there's no agenda on your part. Correct?
No. So, well, yes, my agenda is to empower Belizeans. I
Yeah,
want us
yeah. But
to
I
know where
mean,
we
not
came
not
from.
not anything sinister.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
No. And no. And I'm actually, I'm not a fan. I appreciate people coming to Belize to study, but I'm not a fan of them going there to capitalize on our cultures. And even within Belize, like I believe in consulting with the people. If you're going to research or tell their story, let the
Appropriate their
people
stuff. Yeah.
appropriately let them speak about it. Let them be represented. Um, many I see it happening. You know, even with the tourism industry, it's more than our natural wonders. It's the people. And we need to know how valuable we are. People want to know about our culture and our heritage, but we have to know that value ourselves and know where we came from.
And,
And we need to be the storytellers, not someone else dictating, telling us who we are or what we should do or dress. We need to know that as Belizeans.
I think we really need to believe in ourselves
Yeah.
more,
Yep.
accept our worth, realize that we're as good as anybody else. We put our
Yep.
pants on one foot at a time, the
Actually,
same
we're
way.
better. We're better, G. Mike.
Well, I wouldn't go that far. I think that
Come on, we are.
we're all humans here. But yeah, if you go that far, you might get into trouble. I think once you know that you're as good as anybody out there, then you're fine enough. But when you start thinking you're better, you going where they are, which
Yeah.
is not a good place to be. So
I'm just
these
kidding.
are, yeah, I know you are. Any final words from you? Let us know anything you want to leave us with that we should know
I'm
that
just-
we don't know.
There's
Do you ever go and speak to public groups about Belize history, or is it just focus on your book right now? Do you?
what I'm working on something with two other brilliant minds, which I won't disclose yet. We're going to meet and discuss further, but
Okay.
everyone will be very pleased with it.
Yeah.
Wow.
Okay.
Me and who? No, not really. Yeah, are these minds Belizeans that you're speaking of?
Belizeans, very
Okay.
well respected Belizeans who deserve their platform and respect.
Wonderful, wonderful. We look for. So, are you planning at any time to come to Belize and give one of these lectures or make a presentation to any group or so?
I don't have anything scheduled, but if anyone would invite me, I'm all for it.
We'll work on that.
Yes.
We'll work on that. Before we go, I want to say how wonderful time I had at the show. Remember, we were promoting the show the last time you were here with the Optimist Group.
Yes.
Aren't you also a part of the Optimist Group?
No, I'm not, but I just have so much respect for what they're doing. I recently found out about the Optimist Group, and I just wanted to include them on the show as well.
Yeah.
These are people giving out of their pockets to empower the youth in Belize. And not only empower them by giving, but they're teaching them trades that they can
Yeah.
support themselves with.
Which is more important, yeah.
And
Yeah,
recently I saw that there was a branch or whatever you want to call it, a sect of them in the United States in my area, the Optimist Group. I was like,
Really?
oh, okay. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Well,
Yeah.
get on out there and join, man. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I don't have time for those things right now when I retire.
But I want to say, hurry up and retire before you can retire.
That is true.
I think that the group, their show was brilliant. I mean,
Yes.
the committee was amazing. I also want to take some time tonight to thank some people that sent us some laptops. I got 10 laptops today that I distributed to my kids here in the Charlie Burton Park. Wonderful gesture. Miss Nicole Kean, she touched bases with a lady, Charlotte Null, and some other socialist groups that are over there in the city. It's a foundation, actually, Ixchel, Ixchel, and I tell you, I lost my notes. I wrote it down, but Ixchel something. But Charlotte Null is the chairperson, and their board of directors, and they were kind enough to do that. What they do apparently is kind of like the same optimist group. They
is she
raise
from Belize? Is Charlotte from Belize?
I'm pretty sure she is. I'm sure she is. And there's a website. I could share it later on with you guys. But again, I had this in front of me. Got a whole pile of paper. Can't find nothing in the whole mix. So I want to say thank you, though, in particular to Miss Nicole Kean, to Arlette Gomez, who in Belize facilitated the delivery of the stuff, and of course to all the people who on a regular basis consider the children of Belize and do what they can to make life easier for them and make the road that they're traveling a little easier than our road was. Though I don't know if at the end of the day it's the best route, because certainly we're drifting from our principles and our virtues and our values and whatnot. Now it's the jury's out as to whether we should, do too much to help, or maybe just that. But that hands up is very, very important. The hands out is in question. The hands up, though, we need to help each other and be our brother's keeper, right? Folks, it's been a pleasure. Deidre, thank you so very much, girl, for taking the time and for sharing all of this with us. We certainly are coming away from this richer as far as history and knowledge of ourselves is concerned, right? Gregory, as always, a pleasure, my buddy. I will see you again next week, same time.
Not only destination, but the journey. That's the group on a journey. Alright. Okay. Well, my village was numbered and dark when the ship from Africa disembarked. I jump overboard, swam with the shark, then dog them bite much worse than them bark. My village was numbered and dark when the ship from Africa disembarked. I jump overboard, swam with the shark, then dog them bite much worse than them bark. They tried to commit me to slavery, use me as human machinery. They did not expect such bravery. Grow me dreadlocks, they think me crazy. My grandmother, her name is Daisy. Say young man, no make nothing faze me. Smoke me Buddha, watch me eye hazy. Me no worky Yankee dollar, they think we lazy. My days was numbered and dark when the ship from Africa disembarked. I jump overboard, swam with the shark, then dog they bite much worse than them bark. My days was numbered and dark when the ship from Africa disembarked. I jump overboard, swam with the shark, then dog them bite much worse than them bark. Have me standing in a welfare line, cause I am black, feel me no mankind. Move the chain from my feet, put it wrong me mind, cheating me like I committed a crime. But I know it was only a matter of time before I get paid in full for my rhyme. Even though it was a tedious climb, I held on to mine like a grape to a vine. My village was numbered and dark when the ship from Africa disembarked. I jump overboard, swam with the shark, then dog they bite much worse than them bark. My village was numbered and dark when the ship from Africa disembarked. I jump overboard, swam with the shark, then dog them bite much worse than them bark. Boom! Fire! Ballistic to God in the air. Not only destination, but the journey. Smoke, smoke. Who the one that back down? Have to take you up on a burn. My son, a beast. All right. Don't make me. Again. Well, my days was numbered and dark when the ship from Africa disembarked. I jump overboard, swam with the shark, then dog them bite much worse than them bark. My days was numbered and dark when the ship from Africa disembarked. I jump overboard, swam with the shark, then dog them bite much worse than them bark.
They tried to commit me to slavery, use me as human machinery. They did not expect such bravery. Grow me dreadlocks, they think me crazy. My grandmother, her name is Daisy. Say young man, no make nothing faze me. Smoke me Buddha, watch me eye hazy. Me no worky Yankee dollar, they think we lazy.
My days was numbered and dark when the ship from Africa disembarked. I jump overboard, swam with the shark, then dog they bite much worse than them bark. My days was numbered and dark when the ship from Africa disembarked. I jump overboard, swam with the shark, then dog them bite much worse than them bark.
Have me standing in a welfare line, cause I am black, feel me no mankind. Move the chains from my feet, put it wrong me mind, cheating me like I committed a crime. But I know it was only a matter of time before I get paid in full for my rhyme. Even though it was a tedious climb, I held on to mine like a grape to a vine.
My days was numbered and dark when the ship from Africa disembarked. I jump overboard, swam with the shark, then dog they bite much worse than them bark. My days was numbered and dark when the ship from Africa disembarked. I jump overboard, swam with the shark, then dog them bite much worse than them bark.
Sweet Belizean.
Yeah. Anthony no way me to talk about with the thing that's happening now. Respect. All my beautiful Belize.
Hey, she don't want no waste man, but I had the base man. Somebody feel the pain pony in this situation. She know the chase man, only know just in case man. She need a king for rule the nation. Pay attention, she don't want no distraction, no complication, subtraction. She